Hi guys, it seems any attempt by the Tories to distance themselves from Nigel Farage is going to upset people in Reform UK. Here one of their MPs, Lee Anderson, an ex-Tory, criticised his former party for not saying thank you to Farage in 2019 for helping Boris Johnson win an 80-seat majority. He also claimed that Reform was on the up and up and that it would make sense for the Conservatives to reach out to the absentee MP for Clacton. However, some Tories have woken up to the idea that pandering to Farage and trying to be more xenophobic than Reform UK isn't going to work, and instead victory lies in the centre. Here Anderson doubled down on the idea that the Conservatives should court Nigel Farage.
Is Nigel being banned from joining the Conservative Party a little bit like me being banned from Papua New Guinea? I didn't want to go anyway.
Well, I'll put it this way, Patrick. I don't suppose that Nigel's actually losing any sleep over this. And I look at some of my ex-colleagues, which are classed as friends as well, a little bit disappointed with them, Patrick. Look at the whole of I think there's 6 of them in the leadership contest. Me personally, I've got a bigger majority than all of them, apart from Kemi, but I've got a bigger vote share than Kemi. So they need to look at people like me in places like Ashfield, in the Red Wall, and look to see why I won my seat, why Nigel won his seat, and Richard and James and Rupert, and look at these people like James Cleverly, like Mel Stride, who I think his majority is about 200 at the moment. These are people that nearly lost their seats, and they're sort of dictating the pace. They're having a go at Nigel. And you know what? If they want to win back those 4 or 5, 6 million Conservative voters that they lost at the last election, maybe, just maybe, Patrick, they should be listening to people like Nigel Farage instead of dissing him.
They lost more seats to Labour than they lost to Reform UK. Like, how can Lee Anderson say what the Conservatives should be doing is listening to Nigel Farage again? The reason, in many cases, they lost seats is because they were listening to Nigel Farage. They ran on a platform of immigration, anti-immigration. And of course, they were going to lose if there's somebody who's running on the platform of immigration or anti-immigration, which is even further to the right. Lee Anderson is completely ignoring the reality here that the Conservatives lost more seats to Labour than they did to Reform UK. But what the Conservatives need to do is double down on listening to Nigel Farage, because that's going to work this time.
I do wonder, though, Lee, whether or not there is something to be said about should Nigel actually be more open to doing a deal, right? Because, failing that, it looks as though the Tories will be split forever. Reform, might not really ever form enough to have a majority. And that does perpetuate the idea that we're just going to continue to have a Labour government. And already so far we've seen things like, big public sector pay rises, some quite concerning stuff when it came to, comments about social media, etc. from Keir Starmer. So should Nigel maybe be trying to pave the way for a bit of a reunion?
Well, look, the last 2019 election, when I first got elected, Patrick, I think Nigel stood down in about 100 seats. Did stand down in Ashfield, by the way. And he did that to allow Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party to get an 80-seat majority. And what happened after the election, not so much as a thank you from the Conservative Party, I think that was pretty poor form.
Is he actually serious? Is he honestly serious that Boris Johnson should have went to Nigel Farage and said, thank you for standing down your candidates? He didn't do it to help Boris Johnson. He did it because he was afraid that Boris Johnson would not win a majority and then Brexit would not get done and then he would get blamed for the Tories losing and the potential of Jeremy Corbyn becoming Prime Minister, because he would have split the vote. There was a real risk that he would split the vote, so that's what he did. He stood down candidates to help the Tories. He wasn't doing it for some sort of favour. He wasn't doing it because he liked Boris Johnson or he liked the Tories. What a ridiculous take on this.
Off of the Conservative Party, they should have reached out to Nigel and thanked him for what he did. So why on earth should Nigel do a deal now? Look, we're on the uppers. We're really on the way up now, the Reform Party. Our membership has gone from 20,000 when I first joined up to nearly 80,000. We're definitely going to win council seats next time. The momentum is with the Reform Party. And if anybody's reaching out, it should be the Conservative Party.
Do you think most people out there in the real world could actually pick Mel Stride out of a lineup?
I couldn't pick him out. I mean, I have to look twice at him sometimes to remind myself who he actually is. I was a member of Parliament for 3 years before I knew who Mel Stride was. So I think he's a bit rich coming from there. He's a good guy. He's a decent guy. But you shouldn't be talking about Nigel Farage like this. Nigel Farage, is the most popular politician, I think, in this country at the moment. And definitely...
I don't think he's the most popular. He's the most well-known. But why should that be the reason somebody should become Prime Minister or become leader of a party? Because they're famous? See, this is part of the problem. People were voting in 2019 for Boris Johnson, even though Boris Johnson was not on the ballot in their constituency. They were voting for the Conservatives, but they thought that they were voting for Boris Johnson. I'm voting for the Conservatives because I like Boris. They knew nothing about Boris Johnson. They obviously didn't know or care that he was a liar. This whole focus on personalities is part of the problem. And of course, when it comes to Reform UK being on the up and up, yes, they probably will win extra seats because people will be angry. People were told things are going to improve. If things don't improve, they're going to give the government a bloody nose. This is like night following day. This always happens. Labour won a massive majority and their support in the polls has already dropped. But this always happens. The honeymoon period can last for months, it can last for weeks. But the support eventually drops because the anger that people had with the previous government dissipates. And then a new anger sets in because they're expecting the new government to do stuff. And of course, Farage and Reform UK sitting on the sidelines saying, we will fix things, we will bring down immigration, we will end the NHS waiting list, but not actually having a real tangible plan to achieve that, feasible plan to achieve that. Of course they're going to win votes because they're a protest party. They were, in a sense, protesting against the Conservatives and they won seats. They won a lot of votes. Let's call a spade a spade. They won lots of votes because people were angry. And people are going to be angry with the new Labour government. Even if they achieve a lot of things, people are still going to be angry. And angry people will vote for a protest party.
The most influential politician in my lifetime. So when the Conservative Party start dissing him, as they're doing right now, they're doing themselves no favours at all. There's lots of Conservative voters who abandoned the party just a month ago at the general election. The Conservative Party needs to try and win them back, and they won't do that by having a pop at Nigel.
Well, this is it. I mean, look, I'm sure that they would say...
So, look, if Nigel Farage joins the Conservative Party, I don't see it happening in the short term, but, that anything could happen in the future. What would happen to Reform UK? It would be closed down. It would continue on as some sort of empty vessel, but it would be without its leader. Like UKIP. What happened to UKIP when Nigel Farage pulled out? It collapsed. It's still around, but it gets votes in the hundreds. The same would happen to Reform UK if Farage joined the Conservatives. But many Conservatives don't want Nigel Farage in the party because he's toxic. And he has demonstrated that over the last few weeks. That's why they're beginning to distance themselves from him. They realise we don't want somebody like this in the party. We have already people like that in the party, but we don't want another one. And if we want to win the next election, we have to move back to the centre. And courting Nigel Farage is the opposite of that. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.